considering doing my final college research paper on the 10 most influential movies of all time. Do you have any thoughts on what some of those movies might be? Well, it's always tough to say because when you're in the now, you don't always realize which movies were the actual influential ones. But I think a movie you have to throw in there is Star Wars, because of ILM and Lucasfilm. It's not even specifically that Star Wars was this big important blockbuster, which it was, maybe one of the most important blockbusters of all time. But beyond simply being a movie that kind of changed the pacing of films, the amount of spectacle that people expected, George Lucas as a filmmaker and the way that he dealt with technology and building out, ILM, Skywalker Sound, all of these different studios that he created that worked on so many important, influential films that became like the premium studios, the premium sound systems. George Lucas is behind all of that, and it's Star Wars is where that came from, that he needed better technology to make these movies. And so I throw Star Wars into there. Something like The Wizard of Oz, that's a movie that every child has watched for over 80 years now, 85 years now. A movie like that just so a part of the popular culture that everyone has seen it. I think you have to go with Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the first feature-length animated film that, like, it kicks off. Disney is putting out feature films, and there's still, all of these years later, they are the studio. They're the one. And the other one is Pixar, which they bought. They own it now. And they were always tied to Pixar in its distribution. But so I think Snow White as the movie that created this second way to put films out and is still a classic to the extent that we're remaking it in live action next year. On the animation front, then of course the other one you have to go with is Toy Story. It turned everything on its head very suddenly with Toy Story, where this company Pixar, and led by this guy Steve Jobs, who's been outed from Apple, and they put out a feature-length computer animated film, and it was great. 30 years later, it's still great. It's still one of the best of the genre, and it was nominated for its screenplay. So it's just a great movie. And it was absolutely groundbreaking with what it did. And now, of course, almost all movies follow in its footsteps. And in the modern era, I think you have to go with Iron Man kicking off the Marvel Cinematic Universe. That this concept of shared universes that everyone's trying to do, and they tried to do with the Mummy, and then DC tried to copy them, and Sony's Spider-Man, like all of these different weird shared universes, and that concept of a shared universe, that goes back to Iron Man and what Kevin Feige and Jon Favreau were able to do with that film. Halloween as a movie that really kind of popularized the slasher. I mean, it's tough to say which one you go with, Texas Chainsaw or whatever, but I'll go with Halloween, and created this template for slashers that was copied by so many movies, but we're still making Halloween movies almost 50 years later. So many movies in its vein copying what John Carpenter did with that original film. Citizen Kane. If you haven't seen it, it's a movie that when you hear it's like the greatest movie of all time and you watch it now, some of the effects of it get lost because it just created all these techniques that so many people have copied for decades and decades and decades and decades. But if you just how cinematic, based off of the way that we describe that term, Citizen Kane was 80 years ago. Like, you watch The Wizard of Oz, and there's a lot of ways in which it feels a little bit like a filmed play, where they have a set and the camera's pointing in one direction towards it, and it films everything kind of like this one direction because it's basically a filmed play. And then you watch Citizen Kane, and there's just all of these cinematic techniques to make Kane look taller. The idea of like sets with moving walls so you can see the full environment, and they dig holes in the ground to shoot the camera upwards, and the editing techniques, the way that it montages through parts of his life. It's just cinematic in the modern sense. And it invented that stuff. It's the movie that made all of that happen. I don't know which movie you would pick, but you pick some Akira Kurosawa, because Akira Kurosawa does these samurai movies that inspired all the Westerns, and then they inspired George Lucas with Star Wars, all these other films. So throw some Akira Kurosawa. If you want to go Samurai, if you want to go Jimbo, whichever one you want to pick, but some Akira Kurosawa from the 1950s. Maybe throw in I don't know, Stanley Kubrick, and I'll go with 2001: A Space Odyssey, of just the groundbreaking visual effects, trippy ideas being explored, visual poetry, all these sorts of ideas. I have no idea how many I've listed off here, but those are off the top of my head, the ones that I'm going with. Most of these clips are pulled from my Patreon live streams. I do about 6 live streams every single month. For $2 per month, $20 per year, you can get access to all the exclusive videos and live streams. For $5 per month, you get your name on my end card. At the top tier, you get a 30-minute video chat with me each month. The link down below in the description has more information.